Right, you bastards. Buckle up, all right? We're diving headfirst into this shitstorm they call the Gaza-Israel conflict.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, the one that's been a goddamn powder keg since forever, with enough bloodshed to make a Tarantino flick blush. We've got a mountain of sources, Wikipedia, history, books, the whole shebang. And we're going to cut through the crap and figure out how the hell this whole mess started.
Right.
And why it just won't fucking quit.
Yeah.
And to help us navigate this clusterfuck, we've got our expert here who knows this shit inside and out.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the beginning. 1948, right?
Yeah.
Palestine War, mass displacement of Palestinians into Gaza. That's like the original sin of this whole goddamn conflict.
Yeah, we could say that. The 1948 war, also known as the Nakba, meaning catastrophe in Arabic, resulted in the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians.
Right.
Many ended up in Gaza, creating a refugee crisis that has fueled resentment and anger ever since.
So these people get kicked out of their homes, forced into this tiny strip of land, and that's supposed to be the end of it.
Well,
fuck that. I'd be pissed too.
It's a major source of grievance for Palestinians, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand that this sense of dispossession, this loss of their homeland, is a key factor driving the conflict even today.
Right. So you've got this simmering resentment, and then boom, more wars.
Yeah.
The Suez Crisis, Khan Yunis, Rafah massacres. Like, holy shit, they weren't fucking around back then.
Yeah, the early years were incredibly brutal. The Suez Crisis in '56 saw Israel occupy Gaza for a short period.
Right.
Then you have the massacres at Khan Yunis and Rafah, where hundreds of Palestinians were killed. It was a horrific start to the conflict and set a precedent for the violence that would follow.
Jesus Christ. And it's not like things calmed down after that. Six-Day War in 67, Israel occupies Gaza again, along with a bunch of other territory. More displacement, more resentment. It's like a fucking pressure cooker waiting to explode.
Exactly. The Six-Day War was a pivotal moment. Israel's victory and subsequent occupation of Gaza, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula further entrenched the conflict.
Right.
It solidified Israel's military dominance, but also deepened Palestinian feelings of dispossession and anger.
And those feelings, that anger, eventually boiled over.
Right.
Right. That's where the first Intifada comes in.
Yeah.
This wasn't just some small-scale protest. This was a full-blown uprising.
The first Intifada, which began in 1987, was a turning point.
Right.
It was a mass Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation, marked by widespread protests, civil disobedience, and unfortunately violence on both sides.
And this was before they built that goddamn wall, right?
That's right.
The barrier between Gaza and Israel.
The construction of the barrier, which began in the early 90s, came after the first Intifada.
Okay.
It was intended to reduce infiltration and improve security for Israel. But for Palestinians, it became a symbol of confinement and separation, further fueling their anger and frustration.
It's like building a wall around a prison yard.
Yeah.
Come on, you're just going to piss people off even more.
The barrier had a significant psychological impact. It solidified the perception of Gaza as an open-air prison, cut off from the outside world.
Okay, so you've got the first Intifada, the wall goes up, and things seem to be getting even more fucked up. Then comes the second Intifada in 2000. What the hell happened there? Was it even more brutal than the first?
The second Intifada was even more violent. This time, it involved more organized armed resistance from groups like Hamas.
Right.
We saw suicide bombings, rocket attacks, and targeted killings. The death toll on both sides was significantly higher.
And this was when Israel started using those Apache helicopters to take out militants, right? Like something out of a fucking action movie.
Yes. The use of military technology like Apache helicopters became a defining feature of the Second Intifada. Israel's tactics, including targeted assassinations of Hamas leaders, were controversial and often criticized for causing civilian casualties.
So we're talking escalating violence, growing desperation on both sides. And then, in a move that seems completely fucking insane, Israel pulls out of Gaza in 2005. What was the logic behind that?
It was a controversial move known as the disengagement.
Yeah.
Israel withdrew all settlers and military forces from Gaza, but retained control over its borders, airspace, and access to the sea.
Wait, what? They pull out, but still control everything? How the fuck does that even work?
It's one of the many paradoxes of this conflict. Israel argued that the disengagement was a step towards peace, but it didn't end the conflict. It just changed the dynamics. Hamas gained power in Gaza in the 2006 elections and ultimately took full control in 2007, further straining relations with Israel.
So Israel's out, Hamas is in, and Gaza's still under their thumb. Talk about a recipe for disaster.
It was a turning point. The disengagement, while intended to reduce friction, actually led to a more volatile situation. The ongoing control over borders and access exacerbated the feeling of being trapped in Gaza, leading to further escalation.
And this is when the blockade starts, right? Gaza officially becomes an open-air prison.
Yeah.
What a goddamn mess.
Exactly. In 2007, Israel imposed a land, air, and sea blockade on Gaza, citing security concerns. This blockade has had a devastating impact on the people of Gaza, severely restricting the flow of goods and people in and out of the territory.
So they're stuck in this tiny strip of land with no way out, and Israel's controlling everything that goes in and out. It's like a fucking pressure cooker about to explode again. Tell me there's some glimmer of hope somewhere in this shitstorm.
Well, unfortunately, it's about to get even more complicated. The blockade, coupled with the ongoing political tensions, led to further escalations of violence with devastating consequences for the people of Gaza.
All right, well, let's not sugarcoat it. Shit's about to hit the fan big time.
After the blockade was imposed, things went from bad to worse.
Oh, yeah.
There was a series of military operations like Operation Hot Winter in 2008, which was basically Israel flexing its muscles and showing Hamas who's boss.
Yeah, and these operations, they always sound so badass, like something out of a video game.
Right.
But the reality on the ground is a fucking nightmare.
Right.
Civilian casualties, destroyed infrastructure, the whole 9 yards.
Absolutely. The names of these operations often mask the horrific reality on the ground. And then came the 2008-2009 Gaza War, which was a real turning point in terms of the scale of destruction and the impact on civilians.
Let's be real, that war was a fucking bloodbath. Over 1,000 Palestinians dead, thousands more injured. And for what? Did it solve anything?
The 2008-2009 war, also known as Operation Cast Lead, was devastating. It resulted in widespread destruction in Gaza and a humanitarian crisis that continues to this day. And no, it didn't solve anything. It just added another layer of trauma and resentment.
So they fight a war, kill a bunch of people, destroy everything, and then they're surprised when things get worse. It's like they're stuck in this endless cycle of violence, and they don't know how to fucking break out of it.
It's a tragic cycle, fueled by mistrust, fear, and a lack of political will on both sides to find a lasting solution. And it didn't end with the 2008-2009 war.
Of course not. There was another war in 2012, and then that massive one in 2014. Jesus Christ. It's like they're trying to turn Gaza into a fucking wasteland.
The 2012 and 2014 wars further escalated the violence and caused even more suffering. The 2014 war in particular was the deadliest conflict in Gaza since the Six-Day War. Over 2,000 Palestinians were killed, along with dozens of Israelis.
I remember seeing the images from that war. Just utter devastation. Homes, hospitals, schools, all reduced to rubble. It's hard to believe this shit is still happening in the 21st century.
The destruction was catastrophic. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza reached new depths with widespread shortages of food, water, medicine, and fuel. And as you said, the psychological impact on the civilian population is immeasurable.
So we've got war after war, blockade, humanitarian crisis. By this point, Gaza must be on the brink of collapse, right?
That's what the UN was warning about back in 2015. They said Gaza could be unlivable by 2020. And sadly, their prediction wasn't far off. The situation has continued to deteriorate with the COVID-19 pandemic adding another layer of hardship.
So more clashes, more suffering, and the world just watches. What the fuck are they waiting for? Another genocide.
There have been international efforts to mediate, to bring about a lasting peace, but they haven't been successful. There's just too much animosity, too much mistrust, and too many entrenched political positions.
Well, it's not like everyone's just sitting on their hands.
Right.
Some countries are more supportive of Israel. Others are more sympathetic to the Palestinians.
Right.
It's a goddamn political football.
Exactly. You've got countries like the United States, a staunch ally of Israel, providing significant military and financial aid.
Right.
Then you have countries like Turkey, which has been more critical of Israel's actions and has provided support to Hamas.
And it's not just governments, right?
Right.
There are massive protests all over the world, people on both sides of the issue shouting their lungs out. This conflict has become a global flashpoint.
Absolutely. The Gaza-Israel conflict has become a symbol of the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it evokes strong emotions on all sides. And those emotions, those deep-seated grievances, make finding a solution even more difficult.
All right, so fast forward to 2023. Shit hits the fan again, big time. Tell us about this latest war, the one that's still raging right now.
It began in October 2023 when Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel, infiltrating the border and killing hundreds of civilians. The scale and brutality of the attack shocked the world.
Yeah, I remember seeing those videos online, just horrific scenes. It was like something out of a nightmare.
Israel responded with a massive counteroffensive, launching airstrikes and a ground invasion of Gaza. The death toll has been staggering, with tens of thousands of Palestinians killed and thousands more injured.
And this war, more than any other, has really brought the humanitarian crisis in Gaza into sharp focus, hasn't it?
Absolutely. The already dire situation in Gaza has been compounded by the fighting. There are widespread shortages of food, water, medicine, and fuel. The healthcare system is overwhelmed, and people are struggling just to survive.
It's fucking heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And the worst part is, there's no end in sight. It's like they're all just digging themselves deeper into this hole of violence and hatred.
It's a bleak situation. The fighting continues, and the international community is struggling to find a way to de-escalate the conflict and bring about a ceasefire.
Okay, so let's talk about the international response to this latest war. Has the world finally woken up to the humanitarian disaster unfolding in Gaza?
There's been a mix of condemnation and support, as usual. You've got countries like Bolivia, which has severed diplomatic ties with Israel and called their actions war crimes. Then you have the United States, which has continued to back Israel's right to defend itself, while also calling for restraint and humanitarian access.
And what about the UN? Are they actually doing anything to help the people trapped in this war zone?
The UN has been calling for a ceasefire and urging both sides to protect civilians. They've also been trying to coordinate aid deliveries to Gaza, but it's been a difficult and dangerous task with the fighting ongoing and access severely restricted.
So we're at a standstill. Israel wants to crush Hamas. Hamas is dug in and firing rockets, and civilians are caught in the crossfire. What the fuck is the endgame here? Is there even a way out of this mess?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's difficult to see a clear path to a lasting solution, especially when emotions are running so high and trust is so low. But one thing is certain. The longer this conflict drags on, the more people will suffer, and not just in Gaza.
Right, the conflict spills over into the West Bank, into Israel itself. It's like a cancer that's spreading throughout the entire region.
Exactly. The violence has a ripple effect, inflaming tensions and sparking unrest in other parts of the region. It's a reminder that this conflict isn't just about Gaza. It's about the much broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a conflict that's been going on for decades and shows no signs of ending anytime soon.
Man, that's a pretty bleak outlook. So we've gone through this whole goddamn history of the Gaza-Israel conflict. The wars, the blockade, the suffering. I gotta ask, is there even a sliver of hope for peace in this fucked up situation? Or are we just doomed to repeat this cycle of violence forever?
It's a tough question. I think it's important to remember that even in the darkest of times, hope can still exist.
Okay.
But it's going to take a monumental effort from all sides. Israelis, Palestinians, and the international community to break the cycle of violence and forge a path toward peace.
Okay, so you're saying it's a goddamn clusterfuck, but there's still a chance. What are the options on the table? What are people talking about to get out of this mess?
There are a few options that have been debated for years.
Yeah.
One is the two-state solution, an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel.
Right.
It's been the go-to solution for decades, but honestly, after all this bloodshed, it's starting to feel like a pipe dream.
Yeah. Two states living side by side after all this shit.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine them sharing a goddamn falafel stand, let alone a country.
It would require a level of trust and compromise that seems almost impossible to achieve at this point.
Right.
And that's why some people are starting to talk about a one-state solution.
Okay.
A single binational state where Israelis and Palestinians live together with equal rights.
Hold on. Equal rights. You're telling me after all these wars, all the hate,
Yeah.
they could just share a country. That sounds like a recipe for even more fucking chaos.
It's a controversial idea, for sure.
Yeah.
And it faces huge obstacles, but some argue it's the only way to ensure equal rights and a lasting peace.
Right.
It would require a radical shift in thinking on both sides, a willingness to let go of old grievances and embrace a shared future.
And what about the blockade?
That's got to
Go, right? I mean, it's basically strangling the people of Gaza.
The blockade is a major sticking point.
Yeah.
Israel argues it's necessary for security to prevent Hamas from smuggling weapons.
Right.
But critics say it's collective punishment, and that easing the blockade is crucial for any chance of peace and stability.
So you've got these options. Two states, one state, lifting the blockade. But honestly, after everything we've just learned, It's hard to imagine any of them actually working. What's it going to take to break through this stalemate? Is there anything we as individuals can actually do?
It's easy to feel helpless in a situation like this,
Yeah.
but there are things you can do. Educate yourself,
Ah.
talk about the conflict with friends and family, support organizations working to provide humanitarian aid in Gaza, contact your elected officials, and demand action.
Okay, so that's the action plan.
Right.
Educate, discuss, donate, advocate. But let's be real. Can any of that actually make a difference when you've got these massive forces at play?
Yeah.
Governments, armies, powerful political groups.
It's easy to be cynical, especially given the history of this conflict, but change often starts at the grassroots level.
Okay.
When enough people demand peace, when they refuse to accept the status quo, things can start to shift.
All right, I'm going to hold on to that sliver of hope, even if it feels like grasping at straws. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Gaza-Israel conflict, one thing is crystal clear. This shit is complicated as fuck. There's history, there's politics, there's religion, all tangled up in a knot of violence and suffering. And frankly, it's enough to make you want to throw your hands up and say, fuck it, I'm out.
But that's the easy way out. The situation in Gaza, in Israel, in the entire region demands our attention, our empathy, and our action. The human cost of this conflict is simply too high to ignore.
And on that sobering note, we're going to leave you with a question to ponder. We've explored the history, the key players, the potential solutions. Now it's your turn to dig deeper. Read the sources, challenge your own assumptions, and decide for yourself. What the fuck is the path forward? Is a lasting peace even remotely possible in this blood-soaked land? Think about it, talk about it, and for God's sake, do something about it. Peace out.